Okay, good evening. We are learning Maseches, Yevamos, daf ayin, thank God, into another set of tens in this Masechta, plugging along another 50 blot or so. And we are 4 lines from the bottom, starting from the words Ika da Amre. Yesterday, we had learned a memra, a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel about a man and woman who were intimate after Erisin, but before they were fully halachically married. We discussed an iteration of that and whether or not she's trustworthy in regards to who she would be willing to be intimate with. And here the Gemara presents another option of how to understand that. Ika de Amre.
Is that a Doraisa or Dorabana after Erisin is done?
It's Nisra Doraisa.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Has to be.
If she had relations after Erisin?
After Erisin, but before Nisuin.
It's Rabbanan.
I don't think so. You're not fully married yet.
Somebody else or with?
No, I'm talking about with your wife, with your fiance.
It's
I don't know the answer offhand. It doesn't say here, but I'm pretty sure it's yeah. Okay. The Gemara says, "Ika da Amre." There is another possible way to understand this machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Everyone agrees that if the husband and wife were intimate in this engaged state, everyone agrees that the child would follow the father, and that if the father was a Kohen, then the child is a Kohen. We don't assume that she was promiscuous. V'hachi itmar, really what Rav and Shmuel were arguing about was something a little bit different. Arusa she'ibra, if this woman was pregnant, Rav amar havlad mamzer. We don't even know about the intimacy yet. It doesn't say haba al arusa, so it just says she's pregnant. So Rav says that automatically the child is a mamzer. Ushmuel amar havlad shtuki, that he's a suffik mamzer. Shtuki is a suffik mamzer. Amar Rava, let me explain, says Rava. Mistabra milse de Rav de lo daima mine vid daima me alma. When does it make sense that Rav would say the child is a mamzer? That's if the woman wasn't intimate with her arus, but was intimate with other people, and therefore she's halachically an arusa. She had a child with another man. That makes that child a mamzer. That makes perfect sense. Aval, says the Gemara on the top of Ayin Amud Aleph, Aval daima mine afal gab de daima me alma basrei didei shadin, a very unique shita. If in fact she was intimate with him, even if she was also intimate with others, still we assume that she's pregnant with the child of the husband. I don't know how the math works. I don't know how you would be able to know that. It's a halachic assumption, certainly, because it's definitely not a perfectly logical assumption. 2 lines from the top, Ayin Amud Aleph, Amar Rava, where do I get my shita from? So we get this shita from the Mishnah that is, the Mishnah started on the bottom of Samach Tes Amud Aleph, but the Mishnah that carries on to the top of Samach Tes Amud Beis, Diktani, Yalda Tochal, that if a Kohen was with a woman and that child was born, and that child is now a Kohen like the father, Tochal, then the mother is allowed to eat Truma. Says the Gemara, Hechi Dami. What is that case in our Mishnah on Samach Tes Amud Beis, where we say that if the child is born to this Bas Yisrael who's married to a Kohen, or who was with whom a Kohen had Tashma Shemitah and a child, what's the case there? Hechidami, says the Gemara, Ilema de daima mine velo daima me alma. If all we know is that she was only intimate with her fiance, but not with anybody else, that can't be the case of the Mishnah. That case is too obvious. The case is obvious that she'd be allowed to eat that because the only person she slept with was her fiance, her husband to be. Elalav, it must therefore be that the case in our Mishnah was the daima nami me alma. The case has to have a chiddush to it. We don't have cases in Mishnahs that are pasha. So the case that's quoted is the case of Yalda Tochal, but it must be a case where she was willing to be intimate with others as well. And the chiddush is that we follow the father. And if that's true, Umahasam, in that case in our Mishnah, de lahai isur, she's not mutter to anyone, and still with basrei didei shadin, we still assume the child follows the Kohen, and therefore the child is the Kohen, therefore the mother can eat Truma. Hacha, in our case, in this case on the bottom, where Arusa She'ibra, in our case, to Lahai Isur, that in general to the masses she's forbidden to all of them, Lahai Hetera, and soon she'll be mutter to this fiance, Lo Kolshik, and all the more so we should assume that we follow the status of the father. So that's how Rava explains the Gemara, is that Rav must be talking about a case where she was not willing to be intimate with her arus, but she was intimate with others. So then the Gemara says that Abaye pushes back on Rava. Amar le Abaye, lo olam eimalach, really, kol hecha de daima me alma, afal gav de daima mine, amar Rav havlad mamzer. He would say no matter what, that even if she was, what was the case here? That if she was willing to be intimate with others, even though she was also intimate with her husband, that case is a case of mamzer. Sumas nisin, our case in our Mishnah on the top of Samach Testament Beis, where it says Yalda Tochal, that's bedelo daima klal, where she did not have a reputation for doing anything inappropriate. Therefore, we assume that when she had tashmish with her husband, it was only with her husband. We had said in that Mishnah as well, ha'eved pasal mishum bia, that an eved would make the mother puzzle, that she wouldn't be allowed to have truma if the child was an eved. My time, because Amar Kroha Yishavi Ladeh Tia Ladoneha. The children don't even belong to her. They're not her kids. We follow, in this case, the master. What about the case in our Mishnah, Mamzer Posel Machil? We learned the case in our Mishnah on Samach Testament Beis, where a grandchild was a mamzer. His mother was allowed to eat truma, and the grandmother was not allowed to eat truma. So it says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, where did we learn this from? Vizera ein la. It's very helpful to see the whole pasuk here. If you have the pasuk on the side, great. If not, I'll read it for you. The pasuk says, Uvas kohen kisiyal manag ugrusha. That if there's a girl who was a kohen, she grew up as a bas kohen, she got married, and then she became an almana or a grusha. Vizera ein la, and she has no kids. Then vishavel beisavia kinu reha milechem avia tochel. Then she can go back to her father's house. So the bas kohen was married, she became an almana or grusha. She goes back to her father's house. She's allowed to eat the truma. So says the Gemara, Tani Rabbanan, let's understand the case of the mamzer. Says the Gemara, Vizera ein la, that when there are no children, that's when she's allowed to eat truma. Ainli ela zera. We only know about one generation of children. Zera zara. What if she has grandchildren? So then the halacha minayin, how do we know that the halacha is still the same, that if there are children or grandchildren, she's not allowed to have truma? Talmud lomar, Vizera ein la mikol makom. Any zera, any descendants would put her in a scenario of not being able to go back to her father's house and eat truma mikol makom. Ainli ela zera kasher. I only know about children who are kasher that would limit her from eating truma. Zera pasal minayin. What about a zera who's not kosher? What about a mamzer? Says the Gemara, Talmud lomar v'zera ein love and ayin Allah. We just look and see if they have kids. We don't question what the quality of the kids are. Is one a mamzer? Is one not a mamzer? We don't care. The pasuk is bepashtas as it reads, that as long as this woman doesn't have children, she's allowed to eat truma b'veis avia, and if she does have children of any kind, even a mamzer, she is not allowed to eat truma in her father's house. Says the Gemara, you can't learn that out from v'zera ein la, because ha'apikte l'zera zara. You can't use that to teach me about a zera kosher versus zera pasal. We already used it to teach about a grandchild. Says the Gemara, you're right. Zera zara lo itzrich kra. The grandchild doesn't actually need a drush at all. Bnei banim harehem kivanim. We typically assume that grandchildren are like children. There are applications to this in poskim about the mitzvah of kibbut avayim. Let's say my father says to me, can you please get me a drink? And at the same moment, I ask my child the same question. So my father looks at me while I would look at one of my kids, and we both say at the same moment, can you please get me a drink? My father speaking to me and me speaking to my child. The halacha is you service the grandfather first, because just I have a mitzvah to service my father. My children, as bnei banim, also have a mitzvah to service my father, and therefore we service the grandfather first and go back down. So this phrase has halachic implications in general, and certainly over here is that bnei banim harehem kibanim. Ki itzrich kra, really, when is the pasuk of zera required? That's to teach us the zera pasuk, to include a mamzer into this din, that if a woman has a mamzer as a descendant, she is no longer eligible to eat truma in her father's house. Amar le Reish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan Kiman. Who is this shita like? It's Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Yesh Mamzer Mechai Ve'Lavin. What cases are we talking about here? We're not talking about severe cases of Chai Be'Krusis. We're talking about regular Tashmish Shemita with as an Isser Doraisa status, and that works with the shita of Rabbi Akiva, who holds that mamzerus can be generated with a simple Isser D'Oraisa, simple in quotes, of course, no Isser D'Oraisa is simple. We're obviously obligated to give up all of our finances to avoid one Isser D'Oraisa. It's a big deal, but the Gemara is saying with the simpler, with just the Chai Ve'Lavin, the Rabbi Akiva holds that there is mamzerus, but what do the Rabbanan have to say about that? The Gemara says not a good kasha. Afilu tema Rabbanan. The Rabbanan would say that when our Mishnah Daf Samach Testament Beis speaks about a mamzer, we're not talking about a regular Isser Lav. We're talking about the following case: be'oved kochavim ve'eved modu. The Chachamim agree. That's where the Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim agree that if an oved kochavim or an eved sleeps with a woman, the Chiyaser of Dimi Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Mishum Rabbeinu, with the name of Rabbi, oved kochavim ve'eved abal bas Yisrael have vlad mamzer. Everyone agrees to that. Everyone agrees. And again, we don't pass in this way halacha l'maisa. That would be very problematic, because there are a lot of women who have children with non-Jews. We don't treat the children as mamzerim. That's literally a third of all the brisses I do, a quarter. It's really a sad state of affairs. You go out into the burbs, you're dealing with intermarriage in both directions, one after the other. So next week, I think this coming week, I don't even know anymore. I have to look. I'm doing a bris where the father is Jewish, and the mother converted in a conservative program. Orthodox Jewry doesn't accept conservative conversion. I'm going there to be the bad guy, basically. That's my job, is to do the circumcision and tell them that the babies are going, which I've done already. It's not pleasant. And they said, well, do you mind if our rabbi is going to be there? I'm like, oh, it's going to be a little bit awkward because I'm not making a bracha on his gerus that he did for your wife. And it's very awkward, but that's the din. I asked Rabbi first what I'm supposed to do in these cases. He said, stick with your guns and keep telling those babies that they're not Jewish. Someone should let them know. Someone should say something. They may not listen to me. That's fine. My achrayus is to, as a mole in this case, is to be the bad cop, and that's what it is. Okay. No. What? No, this is not about money. This one's not about money. The adult circumcision is about money, but Jewish babies and these complex scenarios are not about money. In this one, it's a full achrayus that it's my job, it's my intervention. I'm going to be the only person in their world who will put a question mark on that child. And I actually know their conversion program. Their conversion program tells them that the Orthodox community will not accept your conversion. And if you move to Eretz Yisrael, you'd have to convert again. They say b'fem male during the conversion process. So then I got in trouble because that synagogue said to me, it's not right, Phil. Why don't you make a bracha on this? I'm like, do you accept reform conversion? Why do I have to accept conservative conversion just because you asked me to? That's ridiculous. I can't have a standard simply because you changed it. I'm not the one who changed things. We've been doing the same thing for 4,000 years. You guys change things. Don't make us the bad guy. Okay, I'm venting. Let's go. Says the Gemara. Almost halfway down. We said Kohen Gadol pa'amim sheposel. A Kohen Gadol, okay, this was back in the Mishnah we learned yesterday. Sometimes the Kohen Gadol will allow his mother to eat truma, but not the grandmother. So says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, this grandmother is going to say, Hareni kaparas ben biti. I'm okay taking on the burdens of my grandson Kuza, the small container. What does that mean? Rashi says it's talking about a mamzer. He's not such a geshmak scenario. Shema achileni b'truma, but l'chol hapachos, the mamzer still allows for the grandmother to eat truma. However, ve'eni kaparas ben biti kada. But when it comes to my grandson, the large pitcher, which Rashi says is the Kohen Gadol, kli chashuv, klomar Kohen Gadol. So there, sheposlani mina truma. It's the angry grandmother. Oh, that grandchild of mine, the Kohen Gadol, he made it that I can't even eat truma. So she's upset. So she's upset. Fine. Hadran alach almana baruch Hashem. We finished yet another parak in Maseches Yevamos, pining toward the end. And we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. The Gemara presents a new Mishnah. Ha'arel, a person who has uncircumcised, v'chol hatmein, anyone who's betuma, lo yochel b'truma, they're not allowed to have truma. And then the Mishnah qualifies that while those people are ineligible because of their technical scenarios, nesheim va'avadeim yochlu b'truma. It doesn't ruin the other people in their family. The wives are allowed to eat truma, and so are their avodim. If a person has damaged beitzim, that we'll see soon that even if only one testicle was damaged, ukrus shafcha, this is someone who has their anatomy itself is severed. We'll learn some parameters to this in a moment. Hein va'avodim yochlu, they are allowed to eat. Uneshehem lo yochlu, their wives are not allowed to eat, because if a woman sleeps with a man who only has a partial anatomy or who has one of his beitzim is damaged, so then she slept with a puzzle, and then she's not allowed to eat truma anymore. V'im lo yoda, however, if this wife who's married to someone who's a patsua daka or krus shafcha, if she was not intimate with him, then mishanaseh ptsua daka. I'm sorry, let me read that better. V'im lo yoda mishanaseh ptsua daka krus shafcha. If they have yet to have tashmish amita after these injuries took place, hare elu yochlu. That's fine. It's not being married to the puzzle; it's having tashmish with the puzzle that's problematic. How do we define this? One who has crushed beitzim. The Gemara says, "Kol shinif to beitzim." Anyone who has damaged testicles, even one. Okay, anyone who has their anatomy severed below the crown. If there's any remnant of the atara itself, of the crown itself, then the baby's still kosher. There was a big lawsuit that happened 5 years ago. It was an awful scenario somewhere in Pennsylvania where a mole did a circumcision and his equipment wasn't good, and he probably wasn't a good mole. On top of that, he actually removed a significant portion of the atara, which is a very difficult thing to do if you know what you're doing. It's not a simple maisa. So there were shilas that were like in this level, like how much of the atar is left in the plastic surgery, and does plastic surgery bring him back to the scenario of a kasher, a puzzle, reversing psul? Not simple. It was not me. I'm just saying it was not me as the mo. The Gemara opens. Gemara Tanya Amar Belazar Minayin LaArel she'eino ochel b'truma. We understand that an arel has limitations. How do we know that an arel is not allowed to eat truma? So the Gemara says Gzera Shava Ne'emar Toshav v'Sachir b'Pesach. It says the words Toshav v'Sachir, these are people who are about to become Avadim by Pesach. V'nemar Toshav v'Sachir b'Truma. Ma Toshav v'Sachir Amor b'Pesach Aral Aser Bo. That when it comes to Korban Pesach, this Toshav v'Sachir, these quasi Avadim, as we'll soon see, if they're Arelim, they cannot eat the Korban Pesach. Af Toshav v'Sachir Amor b'Truma Aral Aser Bo. So to by Truma, the halacha is that they are not allowed to eat. So therefore, in Arel, we ask the question, how do we know that an Arel is not allowed to eat Truma? The answer is from this Gzer Shava. However, Rabbi Kiva argues, we're going to learn his shita more tomorrow, but Rabbi Kiva Omer Eino Tzarech, that's not correct. We don't need the Gzer Shava. Harehu Omer Ish L'Rabos HaArel. We already know from another pasuk that an Arel was included in the prohibitions against eating Truma. Let's analyze the first shita. The next 4 lines are just a perfect quote from Rabbi Elazar from the beginning of this Gemara. Omer Mar. Let's quote the lines that we need to understand. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ne'amar Toshav v'Sachir b'Pesach, Ne'amar Toshav v'Sachir b'Truma, Ma Toshav v'Sachir ha'amar b'Pesach Arel Aser Bo, Av Toshav v'Sachir ha'amar b'Truma, Arel Aser Bo. So we just quoted this Gzer Shav of Rabbi Eliezer, which taught us that an Arel is not allowed to eat Truma. So says the Gemara, it must be, at least in some way, that this is a Gzer Shava, which is what's referred to as Mufne. Okay, important background, but we've learned this before, but it's great to do a Chazara. Gzeira Shava is when you have one area of halacha that has a word and another area of halacha that has a similar word, and we therefore bridge from area 1 to area 2 information that needs to transfer. However, there are different qualities of Gzeira Shava. A Gzeira Shava, where the words are not really fully available to be used, the words are already used for a drasha, but we're still doing a Gzeira Shava, that's a very weak Gzeira Shava, and any kasha that you can ask to distinguish between source 1 and source 2 in halacha will ruin the Gzeira Shava. However, if the words that are being used to create the bridge from source 1 to source 2 are words that were never used for a drasha, that is a very strong Gzeira Shava. And even if you ask questions against it, it's basically a magen mashuach. The questions will not hold water up to them. So the Gemara says, our Gzeira Shava has to be mufne. How do we know? Because dihilav mufne, if it wasn't a fully available Gzeira Shava, we would have had an immediate problem. Ikal mifrach, and we're in 10 lines from the bottom of the page. We have halachos that apply to the world of Pesach that don't apply to the world of Truma at all. So therefore, we would have ruined the Gzeira Shava in a heartbeat if the words were not mufne. Again, the weaker version of a Gzeira Shava cannot withstand this question. It must therefore be that there are extra words to actually be used, and the words being used, Toshav v'Sachir, are not used for any other drashas, because if they were, it would ruin the Gzeira Shava. And the Gemara says, La, you're absolutely correct, Afnuye mufne. And the Gemara wants to know which of the two sides has the available words. Is Toshav v'Sachir by Pesach mufne? Is that the word that's available? Or is Toshav v'Sachir by Truma mufne? Which one? Says the Gemara, first of the long lines on Ayin Amud Aleph. Hi mufne, which one is available? Says the Gemara, either Truma, it's not, the words that are mufne are not the words from Truma, because Mitzrach Tzriche, there we need those words by Truma. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Toshav, a Toshav is a person, Zeh Kanui Kinyan Olam. This is the person who in Parshas Mishpatim that he says, I want to be an Eved V'nir Salo, and they put an earring in his ear, they pierce a hole in his ear. So he's a forever. Sachir Zeh Kinui Kinyan Shanim. This is a person who's only going to be an Eved for 6 years until the end of Yovel. So says the Gemara, why do I need this? V'yomar Toshav al Yomar Sachir. Leave it be. Just say only one of the words. Don't say Toshav v'Sachir. Just say Toshav, and I'll be able to figure it out. V'ani Omer, I'll do the math on my own. Toshav zeh kanui kinyan shanim, aval kanui kinyan olam ochel. I would have made the same distinction. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Therefore, ba'Sachir v'limed al Toshav she'af al pisha kanui kinyan olam ein ochel. So it can't be that those are the words that are mufne, because we needed those words to define for us what a Toshav is and what a Sachir is in regards to the world of Eved, in regards to the world of Truma. So therefore, says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, Ella, it must be to Pesach mufni, that the words Toshav v'Sachir, as it relates to the world of Pesach, those are the words that were extra. And therefore, the Gzeira Shava is a stronger Gzeira Shava. Says the Gemara, Hi Toshav v'Sachir d'Kasav Rachmana b'Pesach ma'inihu. What are you going to do with those words? They don't even make any sense on their own. What, you're going to say, Inema Toshav v'Sachir mamish? You're going to say it's just a literal translation of the pasuk that these are full Jews who are about to become avadim? It can't be. Mishum dehavale Toshav v'Sachir ipater lo mipesach. They're Jews. They're they're chayiv in Korban Pesach. How can you say that there's any chance that they'd be pater from Korban Pesach based on this kal v'chomer? It doesn't make any sense. Says the Gemara, and after all, we see by Truma, Gabi Truma, Zelo Achil, they're not allowed to eat Truma. These avadim, these Toshav v'Sachirs are not allowed to eat Truma. What does that show you? If they're not allowed to eat Truma, then they must not be like their masters. Alma lo kani le rabbe. And if that's true, hachanami in our case, lo kani le rabbe. So it can't be that the words Toshav v'Sachir were used because Otherwise, we wouldn't have this understanding in the Gemara. The Gemara therefore says, we therefore see that the words by Psachim, they are in fact available. So says the Gemara, but it's a limited form of a Kal V'chomer for another, of Gzeira Shava for another reason, because it's not a doubly powerful Gzeira Shava, because the words Toshav Sachir are only extra by Pesach, but not by Truma. So therefore, the Gemara says it's only a one-sided Gzeira Shava. V'shamina le Rabbi Lazar da'amar mufna mitzad echad l'meidinu meshivin. And we can still, yes, we can learn things, but in meshivin we can still ask questions on the Gzeira Shava. So the Gemara says, don't worry. Kevan de lagufe lo tzarich. Since we didn't actually need, in regards to Truma, the words of Toshav Sachir for Truma itself, shadichad alamed v'shadichad amilamed. Therefore, we are able to learn one over here. We can learn a din by Truma, and we can also be milamed to send over a halacha to another area of halacha, so we can build that bridge between Arel and Truma. And the Gemara concludes that it must therefore be that this Gzeira Shava is rock solid, and no questions can ruin it. Because when the Gzeira Shava is mufna mishnei tzadim, it's the maiden be'ein mashiv, and there's no questions you can ask against it, and therefore it's a wonderful Gzeira Shava. The Gemara between here and the bottom of the page is going to ask two questions: whether or not we should change our Gzeira Shava to add in a little bit more information into the Gzeira Shava. Says the Gemara, 6-7 lines down, it's about to recommend one thing. Let's just review the Gzeira Shava that we had on Ayin Amud Aleph. The Gzeira Shava was that just like where it says Toshav B'Sachir by Pesach, we said that an Arel is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. So too, by Truma, an Arel is not allowed to eat Truma. So let's see what the Gemara is recommending. 8 lines down, Ayin Amud Beis. Ima Pesach, there's something unique about Pesach, that Onein Aser Bo, that an Onein is pater from mitzvos aseh. They don't put on tefillin on the day of the burial of an immediate family member. The poskim discuss this, that even if you come back from the burial, even during the day with sunlight, where you're pater from that day from tefillin. That happened with my brother when after the burial, we didn't put on tefillin that day at all, even though we came home with sunlight hours. The halacha is you're completely pater from tefillin that day. So what about Korban Pesach? Ima Pesach onein aser bo. In regards to Pesach and onein, he is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. Maybe af truma onein aser bo. Maybe we should say that an onein is also not allowed. Why don't we add aninus into the Gzeira Shava? That just like we can learn from the Gzeira Shava that an Arel can't eat Truma, maybe we should say that an Onein can't eat Truma. Says the Gemara, no. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Kra, we have a pasuk v'chol zar. Zaros amarti lach v'lo aninus. Aninus is not exempt from Truma. Says the Gemara, Ema v'lo arelos. Why don't we have the drasha v'lo arelos? Why did the pasuk say v'chol zar and we learned to exclude aninus? Maybe we should have excluded arelos. Says the Gemara, arelos was already included in the Gzeira Shava. We already learned the din of arelos. Haksiv toshav v'sachir. So says the Gemara, that's great, but how did you know what to put where? How did you know that Toshav V'Sachir should include the din of Arelos and the pasuk of V'chol Zar should include Aninus? Says the Gemara, Ma Rice, how did you choose that? Says the Gemara, Mistabra Arelos Havalele Rabuye. It makes more sense to include Arelos in the Gzeira Shava. Shekain, and what's in the parentheses here is just an acronym of what we're about to see. Mechusar Maisa, when it comes to bris milah, he's lacking an action, he's uncircumcised. Umaisa begufo, and even when he does it, it's an act that takes place on his body. Va'anushkares, a very sharp consequence. V'yeshno lifnei hadibor, and bris milah started even before Kabbalah Sator at Har Sinai. Umila zachar v'avod of me'akeves, and when it comes to bris milah, when it comes to Arelos and Korban Pesach, that it not only does it have to be that the man himself needs to be nimol, but if his children or avadim are uncircumcised, he also can't eat the Korban Pesach. So there's very chamor dinim by the halachos of Arel. That's why it was included in the Gzeira Shava. Says the Gemara, that's not true. I could tell you some major differences between Aninus and Arelos. Adarabba, says the Gemara, third of the way down on Ayin Amud Beis. Adarabba, Aninus Havalei Rabuye. Maybe we should have included Aninus in the Gzeira Shava, like the Gemara was recommending. Shekain Yeshna B'chol Shah, because that can happen at any point in a person's life. Rahman al-Islam, there could be a case of Aninus. V'noheges be'anashim v'nashim, and the din of Aninus applies both to men and to women. Ve'in biyado l'taken es atzmon. There's no way to fix it. It's not like bris milah. When a person's an onein, there's no way to fix it. It's really not true. What about burial? Okay, so maybe we're assuming you can't bury it, but bury the person yet. Says the Gemara, you're trying hard, I understand, but hanach nefishin, you're not right. Arelis is nefishin. The severity of arelis is more so than that of aninus. And Rava adds a little bit more. Rava Amar, that below hanach nefishin nami lo matzis amris, even without saying that Arelus is greater than Aninus, more powerful than Aninus, you still can't say that the Gzeira Shava was discussing Aninus. Why? Shavkinan Arelus Tichsiv Begufe de Pesach. You're going to leave out Arelus from the Gzeira Shava, which is literally explicit verses by the halachos of Pesach, the Alfino Aninus me Pesach, and you're going to replace it with Aninus that de Pesach Gufe mi Meiser Gamrina, that it was doubly learned from Pesach. We learned it from Meiser and brought it to Pesach. It's not even the Ikr mix. It's not even the Ikr halacha in regards to Korban Pesach. So it's ridiculous to assume the Gzeira Shava should include Aninus. Says the Gemara, fine, halfway down, let's try again. Maybe we can put something else into the Gzeira Shava. Ima Pesach, just like we know by Pesach, Milas Zechar v'Avodav Me'akeves, that if I am Nimo, but I have children or Avadim who are not, I cannot eat the Korban Pesach. Maybe we should extend that halacha to Truma too. Af Truma Milas Zechar v'Avodav Me'akeves. Maybe we should assume that by Truma, that if the Balabayis is Nimo, but his children or Avadim are not Nimo, then maybe he can't eat Truma. Says the Gemara, no way. Omar Kra, you can't learn it from the Gzeira Shava. That's from Umalta Oso Az Yochal Bo. What do we say over there? That's talking about Korban Pesach. Milas Zechar v'Avodav Me'akeves v'Milachol Pesach. However, ve'ein Milas Zechar v'Avodav Me'akeves b'Truma. We already have a drasha that doesn't allow you to say that this din, that the Zecharim v'Avadim have to be Nimol first. That's not true by Truma. As long as the person himself is Nimol and he's not an Arel, then no problem at all. Then he's allowed to benefit from the Truma. If that's true, then maybe we should redo the following drasha. We should say that Kol Arel lo yochal bo eino ochel aval ochel hu betruma. Maybe we should say that Kol Arel lo yochal bo, that he's not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, but maybe the Arel is allowed to eat truma. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? An Arel can't eat truma. We already learned that in the Gzeira Shava. Haksiv toshav esachir. So says the Gemara, Ma'rois, how did you know to include the person himself in the Gzeira Shava of Arelus, that he himself has to be Arel? It has to be Nimol if he wants to eat the Korban Pesach or Truma. Mistabra, says the Gemara, it's very logical. Arelus to Gufe Havalele Rabuye. That Iker thing that applies to the person himself about Bris Mila, that makes perfect sense to include in the Gzeira Shava, because Shekain Maisa Begufo Va'anush Kares. It's something that he can do to himself, and it's something that has a very sharp consequence of Kares. Says the Gemara, Lav Dafka. Adarabba, I could give an argument as to why we should include the requirement of his children and avadim being circumcised. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, maybe we should say Milas Zechar v'Avadim Havalei l'Rabu Yishken Yeshna b'Chol Shah, because a person can have another child, a person can always buy another eved, and then the chiyuv of that child or eved getting circumcised is renewed every day, basically. So it says the Gemara, no, Hanach Nefishin. Arelus is more powerful than this din of his children and avadim being uncircumcised. And therefore, the Gzeira Shava included what it has always included, which is Arelus. And you could even argue below Hanach Nefishin Nami, even if it were to be the case that we didn't think that Arelus was stronger than the requirement of circumcising one's children and avadim, still, lo matzis amris. There's no way you could have said that the original Gzeira Shava should exclude Arelus and include a requirement to circumcise children and avadim. Why? Is there any possible scenario where a man himself is an Arel and he's mutter to eat Korban Pesach or Truma? Of course not. That's not even possible. Arelus to acharina me'akvabe, but his avadim, if it makes no sense. How could you have it that he himself doesn't need to be circumcised? That's crazy. You got the whole thing backwards. And therefore, we solidify that our Gzeira Shava, as we started, is correct. The very short version of the review is very simple, because it's just the first few lines of our Gemara. If there is an Arel, we know, of course, by Pesach, he's not allowed to eat. That's a pasuk in Chumash. However, we have a Gzeira Shava that extends that prohibition, that just like an Arel is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach unless he's circumcised, the same is true by Truma, that he is not allowed to eat the Truma unless he's circumcised, and that's based on the Gzeira Shava of Toshav Esachir. We'll stop at Hashta, 2 lines from the bottom on Ayin and Beis, and pick up Emir Hashem tomorrow night with Daf Ayin Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.